Hello, beautiful people of the internet. How are you doing today? My name is Jackie, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. As you can see, I have my murder solving whiteboard out yet again because this is going to be another video where I try to solve an Agatha Christie mystery. The book that we are reading for this video is They Do It With Mirrors. This is one of the Miss Marple mysteries and my pick for this month's Read Christie prompt. I have made a few of these trying to solve Agatha Christie videos before. I will link those in the card if you want to go watch them. And I always enjoy making these videos. They are a lot of fun. So I'm actually already almost halfway through this book. It really, like, there's a lot of setup, but finally we've gotten to the part where somebody's dead. So I'm gonna fill you in. The beginning of this book introduces a lot of characters, and they're all related to each other in a very complicated way, so hopefully you'll be able to follow. There were a lot of characters and a lot of build-up before a body actually appears. Usually when I make these videos, I like to think of funny images I can use for different characters, and I can't really think of anything this time. I don't think these characters really lend themselves easily to comedy. Like, there's not any obvious puns that I could make, really, so I don't know. Maybe I'll try to think of something, or I'll just use stock photos for these characters. I don't know. Really, the center of this whole thing is Carrie Louise. Carrie Louise is an old friend of Miss Marple's from their younger years, and Miss Marple goes to visit Carrie Louise and her husband because Carrie Louise's sister has been worried about her. Not really for any particular reason, she's just had an off feeling, so she asks Miss Marple to do her a favor and go check on Carrie Louise, which Miss Marple agrees to do. Carrie Louise has been married 3 times, and she has various children and stepchildren, hence why I say there's a lot of characters who are related to each other in convoluted ways. But anyways, Carrie Louise's first marriage was to a much older Swedish millionaire. I think he was a millionaire who is now deceased. But from that marriage, she has several adult stepchildren, some of whom are actually older than her. One of them is Christian Gulbranson. He is the stepson of Carrie Louise. Also, with her first husband, Carrie Louise had an adopted daughter named Pippa Gulbranson, who is now deceased. But Pippa's daughter, whose name is Gina, is currently in the present day living with Carrie Louise. So Christian is the stepson, Gina is the granddaughter. Now, after Carrie Louise adopted Gina's mother, she then ended up getting pregnant unexpectedly, and she had a daughter whose name is Mildred. And Mildred always kind of felt like her parents preferred Pippa to her because Pippa was very beautiful and lively and lovely to be around, and Mildred is just more plain looking, and people didn't flock to her like they did to her deceased sister. So Mildred is now widowed and living with her mother and her adoptive niece, but there is clearly some resentment there. I mean, God, the one sister gets to be named Pippa and she gets to be Mildred. I would rather be a Pippa than a Mildred. I don't know. Would you rather be a Mildred or a Pippa? Let me know in the comments section. I would do Mildred if I could be called Millie. I think that's cute. But no, she's just a plain old Mildred. After her first husband's death, Carrie Louise eventually remarried, and through that marriage, she has 2 stepsons. Their names are Stephen Restorick and Alex Restorick. Those 2 are brothers, and they are her stepsons. Now, Stephen, I don't remember if he lives with Carrie Louise still, but you know, he's been in her life since he was a kid, and when the story begins, he is there at Carrie Louise's house. We also find out that Stephen has a crush on Gina, which feels incestuous. Technically, it's not, but it's a little awkward, like, That's his stepmother's granddaughter. Like, I don't, it's a little odd. However, it is currently unclear if Gina reciprocates these feelings that Stephen evidently has for her. Gina is actually married. She married this man named Walter Wally Hudd. He is an American. Gina met him during the war. They ended up getting married after about a week of knowing each other or something like that. And now they've come to live with Gina's grandmother, but it seems like Walter is not very happy there, and their marriage is maybe not going great. Then that brings us to Carrie Louise's third and current marriage to this man named Louis Seropold. Louis, like Carrie Louise, is a bit of an idealist, and he is currently running a home for, let's say, wayward youths. It's a home for young men who have had brushes with the law to sort of help them get on the straight and narrow. So all of these boys are living and getting educated near where the Serocolds live. I don't think they actually live in the house with them, but it's on the property. One of those wayward youths is this kid named Edgar Lawson. Edgar has a close relationship with Louis. He's sort of like Louis's assistant. However, Edgar Lawson is a bit of a pathological liar. He is illegitimate, and he has told the different people all these kinds of crazy stories about who his biological dad is. When he meets Miss Marple, he says that he is the secret love child of Winston Churchill. And he just makes up all these lies about his father. So clearly he is a troubled person, but he seemingly has a close relationship with Louis and Carrie Louise. And those two, they don't want to give up on Edgar yet. There are also several people who work at the school, which is, I believe, called Stonygate. Dr. Maverick is the psychologist. We don't know a lot about him. There's also Mr. Baumgarten. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And he is an occupational therapist at the school. Then we also have Juliet Jolly Belfier. I think she is like a housekeeper. I don't know if they ever said what her job title is, but she works for Carrie Louise and is apparently extremely loyal to her. At one point, Carrie Louise even says to Miss Marple, "Sometimes I really believe that Jolly would kill for me." Now Miss Marple comes to Stonygate to check up on Carrie Louise, and Carrie Louise says, "Don't worry about it, Jane. Everything is going just well with me, other than the fact that my rheumatism has been getting worse." Which immediately when she said that, I was like, that is probably going to be important information. If her health is getting worse, does that mean that something nefarious is going on? Next, Christian, the stepson of Carrie Louise from her first marriage, shows up at Stonygate unannounced. Nobody knew that he was coming, but he says there is something he must talk to Louis about immediately. Everyone assumes it's about the Gulbranson Trust, which Christian and Louis are both affiliated with, but note that this is an assumption. We don't know actually concretely the real reason he wants to talk with Louis. Miss Marple then overhears portions of a conversation between those two men where they are talking about some piece of information they want to keep Carrie Louise because it will be too upsetting for her. Also, while Miss Marple is walking around, she runs into Edgar Lawson, the troubled young man who is Louis's assistant, and Edgar is very upset about something. He tells Miss Marple he has just found out who his real father is once and for all. His father has been spying on him and plotting against him, and he says, I can't trust anyone here except he alludes to having one person who is actually his true friend, and that's the person who has told him who his biological father is. Doesn't say who his father is or who this friend he's alluding to is. He's just acting extremely odd and paranoid. Now we're getting to the night of the crime. Everyone has had dinner together and things seem to be going very well. They're winding down for the evening. Christian, the stepson of Carrie Louise, says that he is going to go up to bed. Then several things happen that I immediately flagged as suspicious. So Wally, who as you remember is the American husband of Gina, tries to turn on the reading lamp, but the lamp won't work. So he says, oh, I'm just gonna pop out and get a new bulb for the lamp. When he leaves, people make a comment about, oh, Wally, he knows so much about technology. He always fixes things around here for us. And immediately I was like, wonder if Wally's apparent tech savviness is going to become relevant. Also, awfully suspicious that he claims, oh, I'm just going to get a light bulb. Like, do we know that's actually what he's doing? Do we even know that the lamp is actually burnt out? Maybe he's just lying and saying that it's burnt out, but that's just an excuse to leave the room. The other odd thing is that Jolly, the servant, brings Carrie Louise her nightly tonic, but Lewis stops Carrie Louise from taking the tonic. He says, oh, I don't think you should take these anymore. They're not doing you any good anyway. This upsets Jolly, who's like, of course, my mistress is going to take her tonic. She needs her medicine. And the two of them have a bit of an argument about this. During this conversation, Carrie Louise also mentions how terrible her tonic tastes, which, again, immediate red flag. Then the next thing that happens is Edgar Lawson shows up and he starts yelling at Lewis. The two of them, they go into Lewis's office together and Edgar shuts and locks the door behind them. Everybody can hear their conversation. Edgar is screaming. He claims that Lewis is his real father and that Lewis has deprived him of his rights. Then 2 gunshots ring out. It seems like Edgar has just shot Lewis. Everybody is starting to freak out. But when they open the office door, Lewis is unharmed. He says, no, he just fired 2 shots into the wall. He missed me. I'm fine. And Edgar is now crying on the floor, seemingly having regained his senses, and he's apologizing, saying, I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm so sorry. Oh my God, I could have killed you. Now, Wally has returned by this point. No mention if he actually brought a light bulb or not. Just a note. And he picks the gun off the floor and says, hey, this is my gun. Edgar stole it. Everyone is still reeling from the scene. Carrie Louise is saying there's no need to call the police. Nobody's been hurt, and I don't want anything bad to happen to Edgar. But Jolly returns to the room at that point, and she says that she has already called the police. Not because of Edgar, though. She's called the police because she's just found Christian Gulbranson dead in his room. He was shot and killed. Christian's gonna get a little X. He's dead. Rest in peace. Now, let's go over this for a second, because Christian only went upstairs a few minutes before this chaos broke out. There really wasn't that much time there. So seemingly, there's only a few people who could have killed him. First of all, and in my opinion, the most suspicious person here has to be Walter Wally Hood. I mean, the whole thing about going to get a light bulb, it seems awfully convenient. And Edgar using Wally's gun, again, very suspicious. However, I'm almost wondering, is he too obvious as a suspect? Like, maybe that's a misdirect. That's what Agatha Christie wants me to think. Now, Dr. Maverick and Mr. Baumgarten, the 2 employees at Stonygate, they both left the room and said they were going to bed before Christian was killed. So hypothetically, they could have killed him, but we really don't know anything about either of these characters at this point, so I really can't say they're my top suspects at the moment. I just feel like we know nothing about their characters. Now, Jolly hypothetically could have done it. We don't know where she was the entire time this was going on, and she is the one who found Christian's body, so that makes her a suspect as well. However, my other thought is Lewis and Edgar. Because Lewis and Edgar were in the office having this argument, but the door was locked. So nobody was actually witnessing their argument. I would actually be interested to go back and read that scene again to see, could they hear Lewis and Edgar, or could they just hear Edgar? Because to me, the timing of the whole thing seems very suspicious. Was this fight between the two of them actually staged? Was it all a little bit of smoke and mirrors? I won't put my day job. I know that was not that good. So I don't know. I'm really suspicious of these two at this moment. I feel like maybe Lewis planned this whole thing. I don't know. And now, 3 or 4 minutes after Christian's been found dead, Alex Restorek, the brother of Stephen and the stepson of Carrie Louise, shows up at the house. And he's just like the equivalent of that Community meme at this point, where the guy walks into the house with the pizzas just to find the whole thing on fire. Alex shows up and he's like, "Hey everybody, aren't you happy to see me? Didn't you know I was coming? Didn't you get my telegram?" And they're like, "Christian's dead, Alex." It's just so funny. Of course, though, jokes aside, we have to also include Alex as a suspect as well. We really don't know anything about him as a person at this point, but it's very suspicious that he shows up at the house less than 5 minutes after somebody's been found dead. The timing there is once again very sus. Carrie Louise says she wants to go see Christian's body. And at this point, I had a theory, okay? My theory at this point was, what if Carrie Louise and Jolly planned this together? So when Jolly came down and said, "I've just found Christian dead," he actually wasn't dead yet. She just knew that he was going to be murdered later, and so since he's seemingly already dead, nobody would question it if Carrie Louise went up to his room to see his body, and that was actually the moment that she killed him. I really liked this idea. I thought it was a really fun idea. However, I don't think Carrie Louise actually has any time alone with the body. Miss Marple accompanies her into the room, and Lewis is already there. So I think that theory really only lasted for like 1 page. But I thought it was kind of a fun idea, you know? The problem is, so many people are seemingly excluded from suspicion. Carrie Louise, her whereabouts seemingly accounted for. Same with Stephen and Gina and Mildred. And that's a lot of people should just excuse from suspicion. I don't know. I feel like at some point in this book we're going to find out something that calls the timeline into question one way or another. And of course, it is always possible that one of these people, maybe they didn't physically pull the trigger themselves, but they could have possibly been colluding with someone else and arranging the murder. That is also a possibility. So Christian is found slumped over his desk in front of his typewriter, and Jolly says when she discovered the body, she swears that there was something in the typewriter, but there's nothing in the typewriter now. Inspector Curry arrives on the scene and begins interviewing people about Christian's death. Lewis has a lot to say. Now, according to Lewis, the reason Christian came had nothing to do with the Gulbranson Trust at all. Christian came and wanted to talk to Lewis because Christian had a reason to believe that Carrie Louise was being poisoned. Now, this makes sense when you think about Carrie Louise's health being bad, and also in an earlier scene, Christian had asked Miss Marple, hey, how's Carrie Louise's health? Which at the time, Miss Marple didn't understand why he was asking that. Lewis says that Christian confided this information in him, and though they weren't sure who, they believed someone close to Carrie Louise was poisoning her. That's why Lewis didn't let her drink the tonic that night. He was worried, well, what if someone is poisoning her tonic and trying to kill her? He was doing that to protect his wife, he says. He also hands the inspector the letter from Goldbrinson's typewriter. This was a letter that he was writing to a doctor, basically asking the doctor to come and help. Lewis says that he was the one who pulled this letter from the typewriter. He was worried, like, well, maybe the killer was killed Christian to keep this information a secret, and they didn't see the letter, so I figured I had to get it out of the room as quickly as possible. He hands it over to the police. It should be noted, however, that we only have Lewis's word for all of this. We don't know that's actually what Christian came here to talk about. It seems possible, but we don't really know. And also, Lewis says this is the letter that Christian was typing, that he pulled it from the typewriter, but nobody saw him do that. Isn't it entirely possible that Christian was writing something entirely different and that this is a letter that Lewis just typed up himself to cover his ass? So that's where we're at. And if at this point in the story I had to put money on someone, I would put my money on Lewis Saracold. I think there's more than meets the eye to this man. I find it very suspicious that he had this fight with Edgar Lawson, but he wasn't hurt, and it just happened at the exact same time that Christian was killed, supposedly. That to me is very suspicious. I think potentially he's lying about what he and Christian talked about. I think Wally might have a secret that's unrelated to the murder. Is it possible that Lewis is having an affair with someone? Maybe him and Mildred. That would be unexpected since Mildred is, supposedly not physically attractive. But maybe the two of them were carrying on, and so they were. But then why did they kill Christian, though? It doesn't make sense. Maybe he could be having an affair with Gina, and they figured if they got rid of Christian, then Gina, as the adoptive granddaughter of the late Mr. Goldbrinson, would get the money? I don't know. Or maybe he's not having an affair with anyone. I don't know, but I think he is very suspicious. I think he might be hiding something and maybe not telling the whole truth. I also want to say, I think Carrie Louise being up to something is not out of the realm of possibility either, because people go on and on and on about how Carrie Louise is such a sweet woman. She's so sweet and delicate, and she needs us to protect her, and just keep saying things like that over and over. Which makes me wonder, is that actually what she's like? Is there something more nefarious going on with her underneath the surface? So I don't know if she's involved, how she could be involved, but the fact that everybody characterizes her as so sweet and innocent makes me suspect that maybe she's not so sweet and innocent. But at this point, I'm 47% of the way through the book, and my top suspect at this point is Lewis. That's who I'm going with for now. We'll see how the rest of the story unfolds. I will give you another update once I've read some more. All right, I am back with an update, and first, I just want to clarify, I had a mental lapse when I said I couldn't think of any reason why Mildred would want to kill Christian. I take that back. I forgot that these two are half siblings, so she definitely would have a monetary incentive to kill him. I guess these two should have been next to each other on the board, but this is a very complicated family tree. But to get on to what I've read since we last spoke, it turns out that really everyone in this house has a potential reason they might want to kill Christian and or Carrie Louise, because everyone benefits from Christian's will or Carrie Louise's will in some way or another. So really everyone has a potential motive here. Now, if I had to bet money on someone, I would bet money on Lewis. Just the whole thing in the office seems like it could be very staged. And I actually did go back to reread that scene, and as I suspected, the people in the other room only hear Lewis's voice one time, and the rest of it is just Edgar yelling. So I really think it's possible that Lewis could have gone out the window, shot Christian, and then come back. Now, why do I think that Lewis might have done all of this? I said last time that I thought potentially he could be having an affair with Mildred or Gina, and I do think him and Mildred would be more surprising, but at this point I'm going with Gina. It is mentioned in this section of the book that, quote, everyone is a little bit in love with Gina. Steven's in love with Gina. Alex is in love with Gina. She's married to Wally. So wouldn't it, make sense if it turns out Lewis is also in love with Gina and just nobody knows it? So at this point, this is my theory. Lewis and Gina started having an affair. Now, obviously, that's a bit problematic because Lewis is married to Carrie Louise and Gina is married to Walter Wally. I think somehow Christian found out that these two were having an affair, and that's why he came to the house to speak with Lewis. He found out that Lewis and Gina were poisoning Carrie Louise, I believe, because if Carrie Louise was out of the way, then Lewis would be single and then they would just have Wally left to deal with. I think Christian figured all of this out, so Lewis killed Christian, and then he leaked the information about Carrie Louise being poisoned to sort of like get ahead on the story, He probably realized that this information was going to come out, and if he's the one who reveals it and acts like a concerned husband, then no one will suspect him. I also think they somehow tampered with the lights in the house, knowing that Wally would go to fix it. That way he doesn't have an alibi and they can frame him for the crime, therefore getting Wally out of the way, and then there will just be Carrie Louise left to deal with. In this section, a lot of people are looking at Wally with suspicion, which of course makes me believe he did not actually do it. And also a lot of people are suspecting Alex due to the convenient timing of his arrival, which again makes me think that he didn't actually do it. Alex works in the theater, and so he tells Inspector Curry he took so long to actually walk into the house because he was admiring like how the fog looked in his headlights, and it was just, he was getting a vision about how he's going to stage his upcoming production. He also, interestingly enough, mentions that he heard something that sounded like someone running, which would make sense if, like I theorized, Lewis climbed out the window and then ran around the house to get into Christian's room. Like maybe then that's what he heard. I don't know the exact logistics of how Lewis climbed out the window and got to Christian's room, but I'm just saying I think that's what happened. I don't know. Could he have scaled the wall? I don't know. I'm just saying I think that's what happened, because other than one comment, nobody heard Lewis. They just heard Edgar. So I think Edgar was in on this plan somehow, and he was covering for Lewis, because if everybody thinks Lewis was in the room with Edgar being held at gunpoint, then again, nobody's going to suspect him. They're all going to think that he has an alibi, but I think he really doesn't. Next, the police discover a pistol hidden in the piano bench, and Stephen had been playing the piano the night Christian was killed. However, Inspector Curry points out that while this makes Stephen look potentially guilty, it could just be what the killer wants them to think. And if I am correct that Lewis and Gina are in on this together, maybe since Steven is in love with Gina, Lewis like put it in the piano bench just like kind of to keep him in line, you know? Maybe he's just trying to get rid of as many of his rivals for Gina's affection as possible. I should draw a red line from Alex to Gina because we found out that Alex is also in love with her. So everybody likes Gina. She's the hottest girl at Stonygate. Now, here's another thing we found out in this section that I think supports my theory. So, as I said earlier, Gina is the adoptive granddaughter of Carrie Louise. Her mother, Pippa, was Carrie Louise's adoptive daughter. Now, Carrie Louise confesses to Miss Marple in this section of the novel that Pippa's biological mother was this woman named Catherine Ellsworth. And Catherine Ellsworth was convicted of poisoning her husband with arsenic. First interesting thing about this is that arsenic is the same poison that was used on Carrie Louise. I forgot to mention, I believe the police tested her tonic and they found arsenic in it. So confirmed the tonic was poisoned. So it's interesting because that's the exact same poison that was used in both of these stories. And the other thing that interests me about this is in a lot of Agatha Christie's novels, she's interested in this sort of theme, like Mara from books like Whoa, which she always calls it, is blood will tell. Or basically in a lot of Agatha Christie novels, characters who are murderers, you often find out that they have a family history of violence. So Agatha Christie was very interested in this idea that maybe violent tendencies could have a biological component. Like, is this something that can be passed down in families? So the fact that Gina's biological grandmother was apparently a murderer, again, makes me suspect that she might be in on this plan with Lewis. I don't know. That's just a thought. It's also, why was this thing about the biological mother of Pippa and the biological grandmother of Gina being brought up? It's kind of a weird thing to include in the book if it's not going to come back somehow, And the last thing in this section that I want to mention. So, Carrie Louise receives a box of chocolates, and the note says they are from Alex. Now, this is very weird because Alex is at the house. Why would he send a box of chocolates and have them arrive the day after he gets there? Like, wouldn't he just bring the chocolates with him and say, oh, Carrie Louise, I got these for you? It's very suspicious. And everyone begins to suspect that some of the chocolates in the box might also be poisoned. So apparently Carrie Louise's favorite kind of chocolates are Kirsch chocolates. Those are her favorites. And when you actually look at those chocolates in the box, they look like they've been tampered with. So it seems like whoever is trying to kill Carrie Louise sent her this box of chocolates pretending they were from Alex. This means that one, whoever is trying to kill her is someone who's close enough to her to know what kind of chocolates are her favorite, but at the same time, they must not have known that Alex was going to come to the house at this point in time, because if they knew he was going to be there, they wouldn't have said the chocolates were from him. The logic is just not adding up. That's it with my notes from this section. I feel pretty good about my theory at this point. I think it makes a lot of sense. So we'll see where things go. So Lewis did it. I'm kind of disappointed, but let me get you caught up to speed with the last section of the book. The first thing I need to mention for this section is we are introduced to one of the juvenile delinquents living at Stonygate, this kid named Ernie Gregg, and Ernie Gregg alludes to Gina that the night of the murder he was going for a walk and he saw something. Now, we later find out that Ernie was kind of just making this up because he wanted to feel like he was important, be in the middle of everything. But as I was reading this scene, what I was thinking to myself was, I was thinking back on my theory that I discussed earlier, and I was like, oh, Gina is like, she's gonna kill this kid because she's gonna think that he could potentially expose her and Lewis. That's what I was thinking. Now, the next thing that starts happening is Alex, who, remember, works in the theater. He starts, thinking about the events of that night in a different light. He starts thinking about it as if it were a stage production, kind of alluding to, we've all been thinking about this all wrong because we were just thinking about what was on stage and not what was behind stage. Since everyone was distracted by the commotion going on in the study, they wouldn't have noticed if someone slipped out of the room to kill Christian. Now, you can probably guess where this is going because it never ends well for the character in a murder mystery who starts saying stuff like this. So very soon after, both Ernie and Alex are found dead in the Stony Gate Theater, crushed to death by equipment. Oh, X for Alex there, he's dead. Ernie wasn't even on the board, so I can't put an X next to him. He was only in like one scene. So now Alex and Ernie are both dead. Rest in peace. That's 3 dead people we have now. But Alex's death is not entirely in vain because Miss Marple starts thinking about the things that he said. She starts reevaluating what she thinks she knows, and she says, the study, that was the backstage. We didn't know what was going on out there, and as I said, there was absolutely nothing stopping Lewis from climbing out the window and killing Christian. It turns out that is exactly what he did. And Edgar was in on the plan. The whole fight was staged. So I was 100% right in that regard. I was pretty sure once I went back and reread that scene and realized that they only heard Lewis speak once throughout the entire ordeal. I was pretty sure that was what happened. But we get to the explanation of why Lewis did all this, and I personally just find this very unsatisfying. So it turns out Carrie Louise, she was actually never being poisoned. Lewis put that arsenic in her tonic just to make it look like she was being poisoned, but he actually never intended to kill her. That's why he didn't let her drink it. He just wanted to come up with a fake story for why Christian came to visit him. Christian didn't come because he was worried about Carrie Louise being poisoned. He was worried because he'd found out that Lewis was apparently embezzling money from the Gulbranson Trust. And when I got to this point, I was like, there was absolutely no foreshadowing in this book for embezzlement. That just came out of nowhere. If anyone out there has read this book and there was a hint at the embezzlement that I just didn't notice, let me know, because I can't think of a damn thing. And so, yeah, it was obvious that it was Lewis, but I'm like, how was I supposed to get embezzlement? Where did that come from? So yeah, Gina had absolutely nothing to do with this. I was wrong about that part. It turns out that she actually really does love her husband, Walter, and the two of them are going to America together to live happily. So I guess that's nice. I kind of liked my version of the story better than the one we actually got. Now, you might be wondering, so why was Edgar willing to go along with this crazy plan of Lewis's? The gang kind of infers that maybe Edgar actually was Lewis's biological son after all. That wasn't a lie, and so that's how Lewis was able to convince him to do this thing. But when the police try to arrest Edgar and Lewis, Edgar takes off. he runs out of the house and down towards the pond, but then when he's like trying to get away, he ends up drowning. So then Lewis jumps into the pond to try to save Edgar, and yeah, they both end up dying. They both drown, and that's about it. That's the end of the book. I also would like to know why Agatha Christie brought up that thing about Gina's biological grandmother being a murderess. I feel like she did that solely just to trick me because it ended up not being relevant in any way, which kind of bothers me because I just really love it when you read a mystery and everything ends up meaning something in the end. So, I mean, yeah, I guess she was successful at pulling the wool over my eyes with that one, but I didn't really like it. So I was right about Lewis. I really narrowed in on him fairly early on. The whole thing about Gina was very wrong. I kind of liked my story better than what we actually got. So I have to say, like, this it's still probably going to be a 3-star for me. It was not bad, but I think it's one of my least favorite Agatha Christie's that I've read. I felt like it had a very slow beginning, and the ending just was not the most satisfying for me personally. But that is going to be the end of this trying to solve Agatha Christie video. Let me know, have you read this book? If so, were you able to solve it when you read it? I would really like to hear from you in the comments section. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. My social media links are down below if you want to follow me on Tumblr, Instagram, or be my friend on Goodreads. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a mesmerizing rest of your day. Bye, and I'll see you in the next video.